And here we are, folks, back for another one of these live stream model builds. And we are back looking at this, the 1/48 scale Revell. 1/48 scale Revell B-24D. This is the reboxing of the old monogram kit from back in the day. And yeah, so if you haven't been following along, we are at episode 6 on this particular build. And the plan with this, I'm going to be building it up as a coastal command using the aviology decals, which you can see here. And I've got loads of aftermarket. I've got things like Belcher bits, the radar, the ASV spotlight, the depth charges, as well as the Wild Sow resin rocket wings that stick out the side. I have those. Here we go, the little stub wings that stick off the side. So that's the plan, and I'm slowly poking away at it here on the live stream, as well as doing some work offline. Now, as I mentioned, if you haven't been following along, in the last video, I worked on starting to glue the wings and the fuselage together, and I got that effectively done. So this is what the aircraft looks like currently. And yes, it is significantly large, and I honestly don't have a single idea where I'm going to put this when I'm done. I'm very quickly running out of shelf space. The wings are not glued on. These are just sitting in place just because it looks cool, all in one setup. Now, the plan for this video, I'm going to first of all start work. Well, let's put these wings off. These don't need to be on. So my plan for this video, I have the resin radar dome chin nipple thing, so it's gonna have to go here, and I have to modify the clear glass in here. So I gotta cut this piece off. So I'm gonna start with that. I'm gonna clean this up, all of these little rough edges. I'm gonna make sure all of this kind of fits together nicely, and then I'm gonna work on seams. I got all these fuselage seams to clean up, top and bottom. The wing seams to clean up. This isn't terrible, but I want to do a bit of sanding on here. I like to glue the fronts of these nacelles together. And then if I have time, I'm going to try to stay on for about an hour, no more than an hour, maybe a little less. We'll see how it goes. If I still have time after all of that, I'm going to start working my way around the Bombay area here, filling in these gaps. You'll see here at the back where the bulkheads and the internal bulkheads meet the fuselage frames, making sure you guys can see this in the camera here. There's a gap, and there shouldn't be, and that's just the nature of the age of this tooling, where these gaps have formed. And also there's a step. Now, you're not really going to be able to see the other side of this on either side. No angles are ever going to be able to get in there to see. So I'm just going to apply some putty in there. I also like to putty along this seam here, as well as up inside around these bomb racks. So if I have time at the end of the video, I'm going to focus on that. Get the putty in there, and then I'll do a bunch of it offline as well. In here, I'd like to clean these seams up, make it look like it's one structural unit. You don't see any seams. Once I clean that up, I can brush paint the silver at the end, and you're not going to notice any of that at all. It'll all just disappear into the finished product. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to pull out a round file, and I'm going to start sanding some of these seams around the edge of this resin. Now, by all rights, and I'm a big fan of do what I say and not what I do, I should be wearing a mask when working with resin. I don't do it often, work with resin, that is. I very rarely work with resin these days. But if you are going to use this a lot, or if you're going to use any type of like a Dremel or a power tool with it, it is a good idea to wear a mask. This stuff is not good for you in the long run. So be careful with that. But I'm just going to go ahead. I've also got my soft edge file here. Use the coarse side of it, and I'm just trying to get a nice flat surface. Everything should be symmetrical, so if I can get this flat, then I should be okay. So that's about all I'm going to do, really. I don't need much, just enough to make it sit nice and flat. And you can see when you get it on there, it fits quite nicely. I'll clean up all around the edges of this with Mr. Surfacer later. to make sure that you don't see any of the seam between this and that. And this is going to be a pain to glue on properly. There's not very much gluing surface, so there's going to be a lot of super glue and a lot of playing with this to make it fit. But yeah, there's quite a bit of step on that side, so I'm really going to have to play with it to make it work. Now, the fun part of all of this is making sure that I get a proper seam. Basically, I cut this at the right place. If I cut it long, I can sand it. If I cut it short, I'm SOL. You can't really change anything after that if you cut it too short. So I want to make sure that I don't cut it too short. So I'm going to use a little bit of masking tape here. I'm just going to tape this in place. That's actually not bad. Yeah, that's pretty much exactly where I want it. You can look straight down the fuselage there and you can see that's pretty much centered. Yeah, there we go, see? That's pretty much centered. I'm looking down the center line, and I can't get much better than that, to be perfectly honest. I'll have to do a lot of this when I actually go to glue it together. But then from there, I can really start to see where I need to cut. And yeah, okay. So I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, considering it's clear on the camera. There is a panel or a frame line right here that is pretty much exactly where I need to cut. So I'm going to do my best to cut, as I said, just short of that, and then sand my way up to where I need it to be by test fitting. You're always best to do that. Anytime you're going to hack into a kit like this and change something and make a drastic change, try to cut long, leave more than you need, and sand back. This is just a standard model hobby saw. You can pick these up at most hobby shops. I've actually had the handle for this one since I was probably about, oh god, I don't even want to know, probably like 93 or 94. My dad bought me the X-Acto kit set, and it had a couple of knives. I still have some of the knives too. This handle came from the exact same set, so I've had these things for, god, well over 30 years now. But yeah, you just buy the new blades. You can pick them up at most hobby stores or places like Michael's or whatnot, and replace the blades as they wear out. You also be very careful with clear plastic. If you can notice, I'm not just going at it. Clear plastic is extremely brittle, and I mean extremely brittle. You just look at it wrong. I'm not going to talk while I cut. You just look at it wrong, and it's going to shatter on you. It'll snap. It'll break. So you want to be very, very careful with how you handle it. So I'm just going to be, and it's also very hard to see where your lines are. So I'm trying very hard here to there's another trick if you're not catching what I'm doing. The angle of the teeth on the saw, they will cut in a certain direction, and so I'm using that to my advantage by just running the blade over with a slight pressure, not going back and forth, because again, you catch something and you'll shatter that plastic. So just gently pulling in one direction and allowing just the gentlest pressure, allowing the teeth to bite and do its job and cut through the plastic. I'm going to do something similar on this side, just short of that line, about there. And it wants to slide. Here we go. A bit, got a nice line starting. I'm just going to work my way through that. Take your time, don't rush. When you try to get something done quick, that's where mistakes are made. If you make it the wrong mistake, you might be SOL. And there's no coming back from it. And trust me, I've had my fair share of moments where I've gone too far and I've done something I really shouldn't have done. I have a collection of models that I've done that, and I just don't finish them. They end up in the garbage, or they end up sitting in a box somewhere until there we go. See, Okay, so that's that. Now you have to hope and pray that I didn't cut too much, but that's where test fitting's for. You can fit it on and see, yeah, you see what I mean? I am very, very short on where I need to be. So I got to sand down quite a bit more. So that's easy enough to do. Just start sanding. I'm using the coarse side of this just to make it work its way through. I don't worry about fine. I'm not worried about scratches on this side of the plastic. I'm worried about eating through plastic at a decent rate. Try to keep it as flat as you can. You don't want to be angling it or anything like that. You'll see here I'm trying to keep it as level as possible. Sand all sides at once. You start sanding on angles and you get funky, and then you're never going to come back from that. And there's something else. Oh, you know what it is? Oh, I see what's going on. This is actually not in the right place. It actually overhangs. It's supposed to come back. Okay. I did read the instructions on this, but I didn't quite understand what it was trying to tell me. But it actually looks like it's supposed to come back to there. And then this fits on. And I'm lucky I tested that because I am bang on where I need to be right now. If I sanded that back anymore, I would have gone way too far. So let's do things a little differently now. Let's... Excuse me. Let's tape the clear part on first. And then I will apply or add the resin. There we go. That is pretty much exactly how it needs to be. And from there, I can see where this is supposed to be to line up with it. And to be perfectly honest, I may have sanded just a little too much off of it. Exactly what I said is not this thing to do is what I did. Just eyeballing everything now. Yeah, I might have gone just a little too deep, but luckily I can fill that in with some white glue and some filler. Really won't notice when it's done, but it's just a lesson learned. I took just a little bit too much off. But it's definitely doable. I don't know how much of that you can see. You know what? I am going to zoom in so you can all see exactly what I'm talking about. So you can see how that starts to look. Pretty much exactly what you'd expect to see. Everything lines up pretty nicely. Not perfect, but good enough. Good enough. The only weird thing, which I don't have any reference in any of these instructions, although I have my book. When I set it up like this, when I have it all lined up properly like this, and I apply the radar, it overhangs the nose wheel. Now, the B-24, this version of the B-24, the nose gears opened inwards, and then the nose wheel would come out. So it shouldn't impact anything, but I don't quite know if that is accurate. And this is why having decent references makes all of the difference, because should that overhang or not? I don't know. Right? I have no idea whether that little overhang on the wheel well opening is supposed to be there or not. So I'm going to go back to my references here, and I'm going to see if there is any note. And you can see here where I'm putting it. actually, that's a good reference too, because that's there. That's where the antenna comes out, and that side opening is there but painted over. So I can make all of that work. The floor is in there, so I'm not too worried about that. Everything's looking good. I'm liking how all of that lines up, but what I don't see is I don't get a good view on whether that radar is supposed to overhang. No, see, it's not. Okay. If you look at this picture here, you can clearly see how that radome is square at the back, and this is a bit more rounded. So what I'm actually going to do, not right now, but I will sand all of that down and make it flush with the opening after I get this installed. Once this is all glued together, I'm just going to go at it with a sanding stick in here, and I'll just sand that lip off so it's flush and rounded in, and I'll clean all that up after. So yeah, that is that. That will be, still needs a little bit of cleanup, a little bit of sanding. That's way too high. Something like that. Yeah, I'm very, very happy with that. Okay. So that's that step done. There's still some cleanup I'll need to do, but there's not much else I can do until I get the nose glued on, and I'm not going to glue the nose on right now until I get the fuselage seams all cleaned up, and that's going to be another step in and of itself. So let's start cleaning up some of these seams. Now, doing this on an older kit like this with raised panel lines comes with a little bit of a challenge, and that's because you do not want to sand down any of the actual raised panel lines. Unless you plan to do a full rescribe, it's a pain to have to try to fix those afterwards. So I'm also using a much smaller sanding stick than what I've normally used. I picked these up recently off Amazon. It's the same kind of soft foam that these big ones are, but they're just little tiny sticks, and they're color coded for different grits. I might actually switch to the yellow one. It's a bit of a coarser grit. And I'm just going to go in here and sand down as much of this as I can without impacting the raised panel lines, because you, as I said, you do not want to start erasing those panel lines. That'll be an absolute nightmare to go back after the fact and try to fix. Luckily, when I glued this together, I made a point, and I think I might have mentioned it in the last time lapse. And also, for those of you out there who didn't see last week's video, all of these exist on a playlist on my channel. So if you do want to go back and start following this whole model right from the beginning, you can do that. Hop over to the playlist, start watching from the beginning. I'm also keeping track of any of my offline work I'm doing, anything I do for this that's not on the on the live stream. I'm recording, and I will create a time-lapse video and release that at the very end of all of the offline work I've done. So that's also something you can look forward to if you do want to see any of that. So I'm just going to go along. I want to try to, like I said, not sand over any of these raised panel lines, just sand up to them. Try to save that. And what I was saying before I got distracted, I'm pretty sure I mentioned in the last video, when I did start gluing this fuselage together, I purposely squeezed a ridge out. So this entire seam is proud of what's around it, and that allows me to sand that ridge down and leaves me with a nice tight seam. If you didn't do that, you'd be fighting with this now, trying to get all of these seams filled. I didn't want any gaps. I wanted a proud ridge that I'd have to sand down to the rest of the model, and it just, especially with raised panel lines, it makes everything a little bit easier. The less filling you have to do on a raised panel line model, the much better the model will look in the long run. So I'm just taking my time here, sanding up to detail, sanding around detail, at least trying to. There's still some places like there that it's going to leave a slight step, and I might have to get in there with some putty. But I'll deal with that later. For now, I'm just going to sand off as much of this ridge as I can. And I'm not going to sand this entire video, so for anyone out there who's worried that you're just going to sit here and watch me sanding, I'm not. I'm going to do this for a little bit, then I'm going to switch to the wings. I'm going to get those cowlings glued on, and I also want to, as I mentioned, start putting some putty in the Bombay. So a little bit of everything on this video. I am just going to work away on this. What time are we at now? It is 50, so it's been 20 minutes. So maybe another 5 or so, maybe, yeah, let's say 5 minutes. I'm going to work away on this seam, and then I'll move on to something else. I can always come back to this later if I want. So I'm planning to stay on about an hour, but that's not set in stone. If I finish a little early, I'll finish a little early. Sitting here and sanding in front of you for an hour, I know is boring. And I'd rather not do it talking to effectively myself. I'd much rather do this with a radio on or something in the background, listen to music, but I can't do that on YouTube because they'll get mad at me. So I'll do a little bit of this, just kind of showing you the process I follow. Trying to get in. As I said, I'm not, most of my aircraft models, it isn't as hard as this. With a engraved panel line, I can just sand and deal with everything after, but with these raised panel lines, I'm trying to save as much of the detail as I can. So I'm just going to do this, clean it up. I'll come back later, especially after I get a coat of paint on it. You get a good look at, or at least a coat of primer. You get a good look at where you are and what you need to do, and you can touch everything up as you go. Yeah, you see again, up here I have a step this way. I have a step where this side is higher than this side. Now back here, this side is higher than this side. So the fuselage has just a little mismatch in it and has created a step. And that's, again, not ideal. So that's where I'm going to try to sand as much of this down as I can without ruining that raised detail. Just the least amount of putty you have to put on, the least amount of work you have to do down the road. It makes everything a little easier. These little sanding sticks I bought, though, are game changer. I'm so glad I bought these. Like I said, just a cheap Amazon thing, but it's so much better. When you have this big thing in here, it's really hard to manage. These are nice. They're flexible. You can really get in here and get going, and you can just cut them down. You start to lose the grit, cut the end off, keep moving. So it's a nice little tool. Things like these files are great, but they're very, very coarse, and you would have seen that back here where I was gouging the plastic versus just sanding. So you want to make sure you don't, because then you just end up making more work. The amount of effort to try to go back and blend out the scratches from a metal file is usually, in some cases, it can be more work than cleaning up the original seam. So the more you can get done just by sanding plastic with a finer sanding stick. The other thing I do, I tend to have an old bath towel, and you can just wipe your sanding stick on the towel, and it cleans all the, pretty sure it's called swarf, all the crap that gets stuck in the grit. You can wipe that off on this towel. So I tend to keep that on my leg, and it makes life a little bit easier when you're doing this. I should check and see, actually they're right here, what I have for harder grits, because this is not actually doing what I expected it to do. I think the yellow is the coarsest grit. I don't think I have anything. Oh, I take that back. That's nice. That's nice. These gray ones, I don't know. I'm not very good at telling you what grit something is just by feel. I can't do that. These are a nice coarse grit. Oh yeah, that'll move some plastic fast. Oh yeah. Now you can see how much scratches that leaves. That's just a lot of more work for me to clean up. But that's moving some plastic. That's what I want to do. I want to move plastic. So yeah, it's going to take time. As I said, I'm not going to do this entire model on this live stream. This is going to be a couple of days back and forth in this. I'll sit down for a bit, do something else, come back and sit down for a bit, go do something else. It's a lot of sanding I got to do on this thing, but trust me, taking this time to do something like this makes all the difference on the finished product. It might seem like a lot of work, but at the end of the day, trust me, it is worth it to take the time and make these seams look as good as you can get them before you even start laying primer. The other thing I'll do, just to save myself time, instead of airbrushing, I'll just brush paint. I'll just get black or white and I'll just brush down that seam and get a good idea of where we stand, and then keep working away until you're happy with it. Then you can apply the primer. And honestly, you're gonna lose where these seams come across the top. You're gonna lose the detail. There's no way you're gonna save all of it. But if you can save as much as you can, it won't look so bad. Like, I think I'm just gonna sand off. There's a little bit of a raised panel line around that antenna hole. I'm just gonna sand that right off and try to save the bigger panel line instead of the little detailing panel line. Just overall, it'll make a bigger difference. But yeah, I'm gonna call it quits here on this seam. I'm gonna move on and start working on the wings, I think. Yeah, so you know, there's work. There's you have no idea how much of my life I spend sitting at this desk doing this with a YouTube channel on in the background, or music, or something to keep my mind from wandering. But there we go. So that's the start of that process. It's messy. It's a lot of work. That's going to take, well, I mean, you know what? I can show you now. So just in this one section here, that scoured that plastic something fierce. But now I come along with the next finer and I just sand over top of that. You can also switch it up and change the angle 90 degrees. Sand across the scratches instead of with the scratches. And you can start to sand those scratch marks out that you just made. And then move progressively finer and finer. And eventually you'll just polish all that out. And then a good primer. And you won't even notice that's there. See, already that's starting to look a lot better. And then you move to a finer one again, like that black one I have, which is even finer than the yellow. This is just a quick and dirty demo here. It's not a finished product, but like already, look at that. That section right there is almost good enough for primer at this point. You can always get in there and polish it a bit more, but I'm pretty happy with saying that the way that is now is close enough that you can prime that, and you probably wouldn't see much when you went to go paint. So that's what you do. You just slowly work your way along, clean up all these seams like this. If you have to sand off the detail, you sand off the detail. You know, if you lose some of this detail down the middle, the rest of it will still look good. You can always hint it back. You can draw it in with a pencil. You can just, the fact that when you do your painting, if you're doing any type of black wash, pre-shading, anything like that, you can still make it feel like there's a panel line there, even if that line is not physically present. So it's not that hard to do. Again, it takes time, it's patience, but you can see the difference. I'll even zoom in here a little bit, really get you to see what I'm talking about. I'll get the camera to change angles, but you look at how scored and scratched that area is, and then there's an area that's clean. right? I almost don't need to put putty on that. That is pretty much perfect. And that's where afterwards you come through and you clean it up and you do some priming and you check. But that's what you want right there. That's a finished surface, bit of primer, paint it. You'll hide all that nastiness of that seam. So this is where an older kit, just a bit of effort, and you can get a decent looking kit without any seams. Now, you have this entire section. I've still got this piece to put in. I gotta glue the wings on. I gotta put the tail on. It becomes a process, and you spend a lot of your time puttying and sanding. But now, moving on to the wings, same thing. I'm gonna use the bigger one here because I'm not terribly worried about the detail on this. The leading edge is a de-icing boot, so I'm just gonna get in here and just sand that edge down. I'm basically trying to do the same thing, but just along a wider front. And the other thing, I might have also mentioned this in the last video, but when you're doing stuff like this, the color of the plastic will change slightly once you have a closed seam. Also, I'll show you here in a second. Use a slightly coarser edge, but I can come through here, knock that edge off, round the leading edge out. That's pretty much perfect. So you can see here how the sanding sticks turn green from the plastic, and I just wipe it on that towel and all that green is gone. And that's how you make sure you keep your coarse, your grit. If you let that grit pack up with plastic, or putty or anything, you end up fighting yourself, and you're just spending time, you're just rubbing a piece of paper on the plastic. You're not actually moving any plastic, and you want to move the plastic. That's the whole point of this, is to knock it down. Again, I'm going to come through here with finer. I'll switch to the finer grit on this side. I'll move to sanding sticks. I also have the sandpaper here, the finer grit sandpaper. I can get in there and polish that surface down. I'll probably do the same thing on the fuselage, polish the surface down as I'm getting closer to being finished. Just making sure that you want to have a smooth plastic surface. So I'm just going to get this wing done, and then we'll start moving on to gluing on the cowling fronts. Good. And trailing edges are always a bit of a pain because they're way out of scale. They should be thinner than they are, but because there's two halves joining together, you've got a relatively thick plastic and a relatively thick plastic, and you end up with a trailing edge that is significantly thicker than it really needs to be. So I try to sand. You can see on the front I was sanding very flat to try to knock that edge down. On the trailing edge, I try to come in on a bit of a 45 from one side and a 45 on the other. Now, you're kind of changing the dimensions of it. Instead of it being a point, you're kind of making it like an arrowhead. It's not perfect, but for the scale, it'll look slightly better. It will look like the trailing edge is thinner than the kit really is, and not horrible end. Think of it as like, sharpening a knife. You're trying to get a sharp edge, even though the actual part isn't very thick. I'm gonna clean my sanding stick off. So it's just, you're kind of cheating the system a little bit. You want to knock off that edge, and you want to try to give the impression of a scale trailing edge while also hiding the fact that there's two pieces of plastic that are glued together. And be careful, because the aileron, especially on these older World War II kits, or World War II aircraft, the ailerons are fabric, and it's got the molded in fabric detail with the ribs. You don't want to sand that off. You want to try to keep that there. I'm just going to try to knock down any of these little ridges and then try to sand in a point. It's not perfect. I'm going to have to do a little bit of putty work in here. There's a little bit of a lip I gotta catch, but now the other thing I gotta worry about with these kits are this seam here. the seam that runs down the side of the cowling. Like the step there is absolutely massive, and to sand that out, no matter what you do, you're going to lose detail on the side of this thing. But in my opinion, losing the detail is better than leaving this giant Grand Canyon looking seam. So get in there. If you lose the detail, you lose the detail. All of this is going to get all weathered anyways. You're going to have all of your, if you choose to go this route, I plan to have a whole bunch of oil staining coming off the back sides of these cowlings. So the fact that you're going to add detailing in there with your weathering is going to replace some of the detail that you're sanding out. So it's a give and take, you know. Would you rather lose the detail and have it look like one part, or would you rather have it look like two parts with a little bit of raised detail? So that's actually not too bad. I expected that to be a lot harder than that, but that's pretty good. I'm going to use that round profile sander. I'm going to get into this wing root. That's going to allow me to keep the kind of like soft edges that are in here. You don't want to sand in a 90-degree corner where there shouldn't be. And that's where this round profile allows you to do that. Yeah, that's pretty good actually. I'm gonna live with that. I'm not gonna do too much because when I add the front of this, I feel like that fit is gonna be absolute garbage. So it's probably gonna involve a whole lot of cleaning up anyways. So I'm not gonna go too far down this rabbit hole. And this square profile is super, super coarse. It's like what you'd see in like a metal shop. So it's like a cheese grater, just taking layers of plastic off. So that's kind of my first pass, and then I'll switch to this flat one, which has a finer pattern. Do some more work on it, kind of smooth out the hard edges that other file put on, and then finish up with this round one, which again, it's about the same as this guy, not as coarse as this. So you can sand out some of those bigger scratches. Keep that round profile inside the corners. And then after the fact, I'll go in with my sanding sticks and polish out the worst of all of what I just did. Make sure that it's nice and smooth. Yeah, so I'm not going to bother with this one right now. This was just sort of an example of what you'd want to do when you're doing the work on here. This one's also in here. It's even worse. But again, bit of putty, bit of elbow grease, and I'll take the worst of this away. The thing with this is you just don't be afraid. You know, and this is where I've built enough models and I've tried enough things. It's always good to get an older kit. You know, if you ruin it, you ruin it. Whatever. It was that $9.99. Bought it at the, you know, whatever store. Didn't really care. Especially these older kits that have the bad seams. And I mean really bad seams. Pick up a couple of these older kits. Go buy, you know, a 1960s monogram Spitfire with the rivets the size of your fist. Practice on it, work on it, get in there, get some course files, do what I'm doing. Don't be afraid. If you ruin it, it was like whatever, $10, $9. You can use it as an airbrush test bed, you know, and move on. Like I said, I have my fair share of kits that are sitting in a box over in the closet there that I've ruined over the years, and you know what? Some of them cost me a lot of money, and I ruined them, and they're gonna sit in the box, and I'll probably never finish them. Some of the models I'm most proud of sitting on the shelf behind me are ones that were absolute garbage. Perfect example is the F82. Those Modelcraft F82 kits. Just recently I've had a flurry of comments on those videos where people were like, this is by far the worst kit I've ever seen. Yes, it is. And they're garbage. But you know what? A bit of elbow work and what's sitting on my shelf, I am happy and proud to have that sitting on my shelf, despite the fact that it started out looking like, you know, somebody's old Matchbox toy. So don't be afraid to get in there and try. If you ruin it, you ruin it. If you make it look good, you'll always have that on your modeling resume that you managed to pull off or build that kit that everyone else says is unbuildable, and you're happy and proud of the results. So get out there, build, don't be afraid. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. You know, considering what these old monogram kits go for these days, you know, they're not cheap. And I'm just hacking away at it with a file, but I know that no matter what happens, I can clean it up and I can make it look good enough that I'll be happy with it. I didn't even mean to go and do this other one. I was going to stop after the first one, but my OCD took over. Yeah, that's not bad. That'll clean up nice when I do some more work at the end. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is gluing on, where did I put those? The cowling fronts. Let's see how these turn out. I have a distinct feeling these things are going to be horrible fitting. Just going to, now, considering this is the only wing I've sanded down, this is the only wing I'm going to glue together. So there's supposed to be 2 pins that line up. That's not horrible. I can live with that. A little bit of sanding. Probably don't even need to putty that. I can probably get away with a little bit of sanding and a little bit of Mr. Surfacer on that. So what I am gonna do though is I'm gonna flood this surface with glue. I want the glue squeezing out of the edge when I glue this together. I want to have all the glue in the world in here. Like I said, I want it squeezing out of the edge. I want to have to sand a huge ridge down, because the least puttying I have to do in here later, again, when you're adding putty, it's going to go everywhere. You're not going to be able to glue a clean little tiny putty. It's going to be smeared all over in there. So if you can limit that and just have to deal with a ridge. Whoop. Yeah, that's looking good. Just make sure I play with it a little bit. It definitely doesn't fit properly. There's some seams on either side. It doesn't want to sit flat. It kind of wants to bow out one way or the other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure the top part is sitting flush. I'm going to make sure up here is good. Right? Sides, top, minimal gap, as lined up as possible. I'll leave the grossness on the bottom, because when it's sitting on the shelf, you're never really going to see that. And I can get in there and fill that up later with putty and hide that. But I want the top to look as good as possible from the get-go. So that's what I am going to do. I think my problem is my seam on this side doesn't line up properly. And I think I'm seeing the same thing here. So I'm going to take just a second, and I'm just going to knock down that seam a little bit. I'm going to make sure that they're level, so that when I put this piece on, yeah, see, that's what I should have done. Now there's not as much rocking. This one is rocking back and forth, and it's because I have a mismatched seam. By sanding that seam down the way I did there, this one doesn't rock as much. It's a nice solid fit on all the sides. So, yeah, it is what it is. Okay, well, I'll do the same thing for this one. I'm going to get in there and just swimming in glue. And if there's any newer folks out there and you're wondering what I'm using, this is just a Tamiya, same regular old Tamiya. We call it Tamiya White, the thick. A lot of people don't like this Tamiya thick glue. They find it too gooey. I love it for just this thing, you know, putting two bigger pieces together, fuselage halves, stuff like this. I swapped out, I'll show you in a second actually what I did. But you know what? I don't mind having a little bit of this glue squeeze out. Like I said, it helps. It depends on who you watch. Like, I've been watching quite a bit of the modeling, Nigel's modeling desk, and he doesn't want glue squeezing out, right? But for me, if I have to putty a seam anyways, if it's a kit like this where, you know, having to putty and sand a seam is inevitable, I'd rather have the glue squeeze out and sand off a plastic glue ridge than have to slam putty in there and then sand that down. So it all just depends on what you want to do, and I prefer that way. Okay, as I was saying, Tamiya white, plain old Tamiya cement. The brush you get out of the box is a big thick brush, and then the Tamiya thin, the extra thin, the green, it has the tiny little brush. So and they're interchangeable, and I'll try to do this without making an absolute mess everywhere. But these should just come off. And I just took the little brush off of an extra thin, an old extra thin, and I slid it on here onto my regular. And now I'm using the thick, but I have a tiny little applicator brush that allows me to get in there and get a little bit more detail. Yeah, see, it's just that easy to swap out these brushes. It gives me the ability to get just a little bit more in there, a little bit more precise with my glue, and it's not all just everywhere, like slopping it on. So, little tip out there. Just do that if you have to. I'm going to run a little bit of extra thin now, just along the seam here. I mean, I really don't need to do this. There is so much glue in there, but every little bit helps. So, I'm just going to do that. Now, because I also have the propeller axles, I guess, prop shafts coming out of the engines, I can't get a good straight down squeeze on it, so I'm just going to have to use my fingers and get on there and give it some pressure. Again, for anyone who's on the channel, who's watching this, who is newer to the hobby, model glue, air quotes glue, it's not really a glue. The proper term is a cement. Effectively, what the glue does is it breaks the bonds down of the plastic. Plastic is just a whole lot of chains of polymers all chained together, and that's what gives it its shape, its durability. When you add the cement, the Tamiya model cement, any of this model glue, what it does is it softens those connections and makes the plastics almost gooey. And so when you push these two parts together, you're actually, instead of just, two pieces of plastic hitting each other, you could use glue and just layer glue, and then it's just, two pieces of plastic sandwiched with a layer of glue in the middle. That's how paper gets glued together. But with model cement, when you put the cement on both sides, it softens those up. When you squeeze it together, you're squeezing the two layers of plastic together. When it dries, it's bonded as one piece. You're linking the polymer chains from the two pieces together, and it effectively melts and molds into one layer of plastic. So that's where that pressure, the squeezing, and that's where you get that plastic squeezing out. You're liquefying that glue, and when you squeeze it, you're squeezing out a little tiny plastic ridge. You sand that ridge down, as you saw here, and there's no seam at all. My nail, it's just sliding. You can't catch anything on that. It's basically one layer of plastic. And that's what you want to go for. That's the whole point of all of this. So if you can get that, you're in a perfect spot. What are we looking at? 21:19. I only have 10 minutes. Oh man, time flies when you're having fun, eh? I thought this would be a shorter video. Okay, move the wing aside. Let's get this back out. As I said at the beginning, again, there are all those people who are now on the channel who weren't here when I started. I started by modifying the nose section here, cutting the clear window to take the resin, I'll tape this back in place. I cut the bottom of the window off, the piece is actually here, so that I could glue on this resin radome under the nose, which is what the British ASR B-24s had. So I started off by making that modification. I'll do some more work with that offline. Then I started sanding the fuselage seams, and I showed how all of that's done. Then I worked on the wing. Now I'm going to come underneath, and I'm going to apply a bit of putty inside here. You can see this giant seam between the internal fuselage bulkhead and the outer plastic of the fuselage. That's going to be very, very visible. If you can imagine, you know, you when this is sitting on the ground, you'll see right up into here, and you'll see that gap, front and back. It's going to be very prominent on this model when it's sitting on the shelf, and I don't want to see that. So what I'm going to do is just jam some putty up in there and fix it all later. Sand it out with sanding sticks and everything, and hand paint it with the aluminum paint at the very end. So this is just the white Tamiya putty. They have different variants of it. They've got stuff that dries fast. They have stuff that only cures under UV light. I prefer the white. I find it gives me enough working time to do what I want to do. It's relatively inexpensive as well. And again, I mentioned this at the beginning, but for those of you who weren't here, you're not going to see the back side of these bulkheads at all. There's no way to see into the other side of them. The Bombay side is the only side that will be visible on the finished model. So the fact that this putty is being squeezed out into the other side, I don't care. You're not going to see it. I don't care what color it is. I just want to fill these gaps. I'm just also using a basic toothpick. They're cheap and they do the job, and you can get a little bit of putty. You can get in there and jam it down into the corners you want to jam it down into. Wipe off the excess, and then, like I said, after the fact, I'll clean that up with some sanding sticks, repaint everything with a brush, and at the end of the day, you will never know that I have done any of what I just did. The other thing I might end up doing, that bulkhead still has some play in it. I might end up coming in on the backside with some super glue and a little bit of baking powder and baking soda. Super glue and baking soda is one of the best things you can do to strengthen a kit. It makes almost like a concrete concoction. So I'll come in on the backside there, and I'll add, I'm going to break that off again, aren't I? A little bit of super glue and baking soda, and I'm just going to make sure that all of that gets locked into place so that bulkhead doesn't flex as I'm sanding. But again, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good enough. Same here. This one has a bit of play in it, but I'm not going to be too worried, because once you paint that aluminum and you do some, you know, a bit more black wash in there, so much of that's just going to disappear. You know, it's just going to look like it's part of the structure. You know, these planes were not perfect at the day. They had lots of weird edges and corners and stuff, and so all of that will all just play the part. Yeah, that's I'm happy with that. The other thing I'm going to do, again, I mentioned, I'm going to come down in here. I want to fill in some of these holes in these corners where the bomb racks meet the center fuselage. The work I did, again, if you haven't watched the previous videos where I did a bunch of this work, go back and watch them. It's worth seeing the process. I ended up modifying this Bombay heavily and did a whole bunch of custom scratch building in here to make it look a little closer to how a real B-24 Bombay would look. And so it involved changing some of this structure and the way it's all assembled. So there's some seams in here that you couldn't clean up until after the fuselage was assembled, which is now effectively. So I'm just kind of going to go through here, slather this on like, you know, icing on a cake, and it'll all disappear when you do some sanding and some weathering. Quickly do the other side, and then that should be really close to my 1 hour video, and we'll move on. So just gonna get in here and fill in all these little holes. And again, it's one of those things, you know, I'm not try to be too careful because I don't need to be too careful. There's no point wasting effort on something that you don't need to waste effort on. I'm hiding the worst of my crimes, but I can then... The putty is hiding the crimes I made while I was building all of this structure. And the paint and weathering will hide the crimes that I'm doing now when I'm applying the putty. So at the end of the day, you're never ever going to see any of it. All the crimes will be hidden. But I'm saving myself lots of time and extra effort by doing it this way. I'm just going to put a little bit here because I want to hide the seams between this plastic. One side of this structure was put together and then the other side was slid in. So one side I was able to clean up and this other side you couldn't get to until after it was put together. So that's where I'm just trying to make it all look cohesive and like one. Trust me, if you're watching this now and you think there's no way, come back, keep following these videos, and at the end of it all, you'll see what I'm talking about. All of this inside of here will look... You'll never even notice that I did any of what I just did in there when I'm done, and everything will look cohesive and finished. Get that in the garbage can. Okay. So I'm going to call it here, and as I do on most of these videos, I'm going to make the quick list of things that I need to get done offline so I don't lose track. So, I have no idea what that bang just was. Okay, anyways, I'll check that in a second. Sand, second wing, install cowlings, second wing. That gets the two wings to the same point. On the fuselage, I'm going to sand fuselage seams, and I know my writing is horrible, and don't worry about it. Sand Bombay. I'm also going to install, actually no, I have to super glue the backside of bulkhead. Then I'll sand Bombay. And I think that will get it to a point where on the next video we can jump in. And I don't know what I'll do in the next video. I honestly have no idea what I'll do. I'll figure that out before the next video. But I think that's the plan. So as you can probably see from what I just wrote, a ton of what I'll be doing offline between now and the next live stream is going to be sanding. I'm going to get all the seams cleaned up. I'm going to get all this Bombay cleaned up. Everything will be ready to go. I'll get all the wings primed, prepped and sanded and ready to go. And we'll come back again in probably about a month, give or take. And then we'll see what's going next. I'll probably glue the nose on, get that glued together. Yeah, and then I'll start prepping for paint, I think. Maybe get more of the windows and stuff glued in, getting the turrets assembled. We'll see. We'll see. We'll get there when we get there. So, I want to wrap it up here. Thank you, everybody who was on this channel. I appreciate all of you out here. If you want to go back and watch this process from the start, all these time-lapse videos exist in its own playlist. You can go and watch me from the beginning till now, see the progress as I've gone. Tips and tricks section is there if you want to see how I do a lot of this stuff, the processes behind it, and just generally keep track of the channel. I got more stuff coming out. I got time-lapse builds coming out of the A6, the F5, and the F14 that I just recently built. Just finished, literally finished yesterday. Those have time-lapse videos coming out. I've got airshow videos coming up next month from London. My AirCAF history videos coming out middle of the month. So stay tuned. Lots of content still coming out. So we're not done, and this will be back in about a month. Once I get caught up offline, we'll come back and we'll do another live stream, and you can watch me continue to build this. And just as we're going offline, let's put the wings back in. Let's finish this video off similar to how we started it, with effectively a completed B-24 sitting on the shelf. So there we go. Thank you for watching. We'll see you guys again next time. Have a good one.